He's the quintessential American chef with a French accent. We talk to Connecticut resident and iconic and legendary TV chef Jacques Pepin about cooking and turning 90. Plus, we take a look at other stories making the headlines from around the region. This is Connecticut East This Week. Hello, I'm Brian Scott Smith. He hit American TV screens on PBS in 1982, showing the nation everyday cooking with Jacques Pepin, the French chef who left his home country of France when he was just in his 20s, and he never went back. Jacques turns 90 years old later this year and has been living and calling Connecticut his home for 50 years in the shoreline town of Madison. But far from hanging up his apron and putting away his chef's knives, he is embarking on a tour of the nation to celebrate his 90th birthday and raise money for his foundation that helps people become chefs and enter the world of cooking. I caught up with Jacques recently for a chat about his life, his love of cooking, his friendship with Julia Childs, and yes, yet another cookbook coming out later this year. Joining us on the podcast is legendary chef Jacques Pepin. Jacques, welcome to Connecticut East This Week.
Thank you. Thank you for having me in that cold January morning.
It is indeed, but thankfully through technology, we're both nice and warm. So first of all, I want to say to you, of course, happy 90th birthday before it occurs. That will be happening later this year. How does it feel being 90?
Getting old is not that easy. I wish I were a bit younger, but I could be dead also. It's okay.
Let's take you back. I want to take you back to when you were 13 years old. And I believe that's when you left school to become an apprentice at a kitchen, which is where this all started for you. That was a young age, maybe not back then, but it certainly seems a young age today. What are your memories of that?
Well, to start with, I finished school. I did because in France, we had to go at the end of the primary school, which was 14 years old. And I was in that class when I was 13 already. And I took all the final exam too. So I finished the exam. That's where I said, okay, now I can leave. And I left. At that time, the world was probably much easier now for a young person, in the sense that my father was a cabinet maker, my mother was a cook in a restaurant, and we had no television, and we had no radio, and we had no telephone, and we don't have it. Ultimately, choice was easier. I was going to be a cook or a cabinet maker, especially my aunt and all that. I have 4 or 5 cabinet maker, but we also have a lot of cook in my family in France. I count through the year, I can count 12 different restaurants, and the 12 of them are run by women. My 2 aunts, sister-in-law too. So it was a woman usually who run the show. It's pretty well known in Lyon, actually. Some formidable woman cook who have 3-star restaurants, like La Mer Brasier and so forth. So it was very well known for that. In fact, when I was with the president between 56 and 58 in Paris, coming back to Lyon for a few days vacation, I go to see my aunt, a restaurant, to get into the kitchen. She threw me out. She said, you use too much butter or whatever. I'm the chef of the president. No one is impressed. They threw me out. Okay. So those women were tough.
Let's move you forward in time. By the age of around about, I believe, 25, you moved to America. You left your home in France and moved to America. And basically, you've been here ever since. What was the rationale for coming to America?
America was the golden world. So I always wanted to come to America. I wasn't married. I worked in Paris. I was free. And I came to America for a year. That's what I thought I would do. And at that time, certainly the quota for French people were quite open, and I got a green card in 3 months or whatever. So it was pretty easy. And I said, I will come for a year or two, learn the language, and go back. I liked American, from jazz to that type of thing we heard during the war, and of course, the war. So when I was a kid, so that was my reason, and I loved it from the beginning. I thought people were very welcoming, that say, oh, you come from a great country and all that. And I tell the people, I'm in America, tell me, they don't have any bread there, they don't have any cheese, the French people. So anyway, that was I didn't really have a specific reason, just a desire to come here.
Am I correct in assuming, though, that you did actually learn your English in America?
Yes, I did take maybe a few months of basic English in a place in Paris before I came, when I had decided to come. But I came on a student boat, and there was a teacher here, guy who spoke French. It was a group of students coming back from Europe, from different part of Europe for the summer. And so that teacher who lived in New York as well, I said that I got to go to learn English somewhere. It's only Columbia University is the best school. Of course, I never heard of Columbia, but the week after I was here, I took the subway. I asked and ended up at Columbia and somehow ended up being able to speak to someone and registered for English for foreign students, which I did for at least 2, maybe 3 years until I was English for freshmen. And then after, since I never went to high school or anything, I asked and was admitted to take an entrance examination, which somehow I passed. But in that, I had to take different classes, keep a B average, to be admitted in the regular college, which lasted a couple of years also before I was admitted in general studies. So it was a long process, but I live in New York. I work in New York. And also the big difference is that in France, until even when I left, I worked at the Plaza Athénée in Paris. We still work the day in two shifts. You start at 9 o'clock in the morning, finish at 2, start at 6, and finish at 10. So you couldn't really do much more. But here, it was one shift, so I started at, 9 in the morning, finished at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It was like I was off every day. so it was easier than in France, yes.
Why do you think you've never lost your accent?
My Connecticut accent, you mean?
A little bit like me. I haven't lost my accent. I've been here only 15 years, so it pales in comparison to your time. But why do you think you never lost your accent?
I don't know. I tried. I certainly tried, but it didn't work out. I don't know. Accents, unless you come to a country when you are young, or like my daughter when she was a smaller baby too, then, but otherwise when you come at like 25 like me, it's not easy. Some people do it. I haven't been able to do it.
You, of course, moved to Connecticut. You've been here, I believe now, for about 50 years in Connecticut, isn't it?
I moved in 76, so yeah.
And obviously you fell in love with Connecticut. You're here. We're very grateful that you are here in Connecticut. Of course, America got introduced to you, I would say, when you started doing the TV show with Julia Child. How did that all start?
Yeah, no, I started way before Julia. I met Julia in 1960, in 1959. So at that time, she just came from France. And actually, the first time I met with her, we spoke French. She spoke French better than I spoke English at the time. And at that time, she had never had television. She never had a book. She was never the full editor of a magazine. So she was pretty unknown. And I met her through a friend in New York, and we became friends. But I was asked, the first time that I did a series on television was 1982. The PBS station in Florida, in Jacksonville, Florida, I did a series of 13 shows. And then after that, I forget exactly when, but I think the end of the 80s, yeah, I went through, I was at that time I was doing 35, 40 weeks a year of cooking classes it was the time when women liberation exploded and organic garden too, and all kind of people opened those little cookware shop with a cooking school in the back, and that was new. And I was asked to go to one or two, and they said, "Oh, can we book you for next year?" And ultimately, that's what I was doing, 30, 35 weeks, at least a year. At that point, I was doing classes at Martin Yan. He was at a cooking school in San Francisco, or outside of San Francisco. And so he told me when they said, KQED is the PBS station in San Francisco. They asked me to do a show tomorrow. Can you come and do it with me? I said, sure. So we came both, bone out a chicken, did whatever. Anyway, the producer there asked me, would you be interested in doing a series with us? And I said, yes. And frankly, I didn't expect it to happen because I was asked by WNET in New York and WGBH in Boston. And I said, yes, it's time, but they never raised money. So we never did. And I don't know how to raise money. So, but there, KQED asked me, and eventually they got the money, and I did actually 12 or 13 series with KQED, series usually of 26 shows we do for some reason, which is a double series. But yes, I'm really and did it to KQED for all of those shows. And in fact, now with our little foundation and so forth, my son-in-law is actually a full professor at Johnson and Wales. He's a chef. I've been a chef for years, but he went back and eventually got his PhD and did that. And he's getting a lot of the material. We have access to all of the material of KQED, of those 13 series, years and years and years. He's extrapolated those pieces in Instagram or whatever out to peel a leak or whatever. They've been very good with that, with me, all of those years. Yeah. So I have a lot of friends in San Francisco.
Talk to us about your foundation, because that's obviously very important. That's coming up for 10 years very soon. What was the purpose behind the foundation, and tell us who it helps?
It was actually my son-in-law and my daughter who did it, and I would never have done it. I've been very lucky this way. My daughter does Facebook for me. We had 300,000 people at the beginning of the pandemic, and we have almost 2 million now. I would never have done Facebook. I would never done a foundation. I have a friend of me in town here, Tom Hopkins. I've been working 40 years with him because he's a photographer, camera, and I did all those books with him all those years. And he decided at some point to do a thing on the...
A website.
A website. My brain at that point goes every 2 minutes. I forget the name. So he did a website on my artwork. I've been paying for 60 years, more than 60 years. And all of those things happened to me, and I would never have done them without someone doing them for me. So I've been very lucky. So at some point, like 10 years ago, or whenever it was, my son-in-law said, "You've been teaching all your life with all those series. Who would you like to teach now?" We talk about it for a while, and I say, people who have been a bit disenfranchised with life, drug addicts, or people who come out of jail, or people. So that's what we decided to do through Community Kitchen. I personally feel that I can train someone in 6 weeks to peel potato and clean salad and poach an egg and very basic technique. And if that person likes it and stays there, 5, 6 years later, she or he is the chef there in a small restaurant, and you have redone your life. And it's been very gratifying also to do that. And that's basically what the foundation does. And the world of chef is very generous. And at some point during the pandemic also, my son-in-law asked all the known chefs from Thomas Keller to Daniel Boulou and so forth if they wanted to do a video for the foundation to give to people. And I think now we are 400 chefs of whoever you speak to in America. Known chef is going to be in the, and given that, so if people come to the foundation, young chef, I think it's $60 a year, have access to all of that material, and which could be very good.
Talk to us about the 90 Chefs, 90 Dinners campaign that started last year and obviously will continue this year. It's a big undertaking for you, but it will actually help the foundation.
Yes, again, my son-in-law and daughter were the father of that idea. It wasn't mine. So we already did Tom Colicchio in New York. We did Gramercy Tavern in New York. We did 2 or 3 and already made a fair amount of money. So people charge whatever they want. And even home people are doing some party at home, like Andrew Zimmer, for example, I think a couple of weeks ago in in Indianapolis, he did a party, and I connected through Zoom with his people that was in his house doing it. So, yes, and I have a lot of stuff on the West Coast coming up, and we have people who will charge over $2,000, and other people who charge $200. So it's totally different.
Talk to us about, obviously, the changing face of cooking. You've seen so many trends come and go. What are your thoughts about cooking and the whole sort of social media, of which you are, as you said, part of it? We see all of these sort of meaning people on social media doing recipes. Does it make you happy, or does it make you cringe sometimes when you see some of it?
No, that's good. No, I already learned something. If I cook with someone, and so you already learn something. For some time you learn what not to do, but you learn something. It has changed a great deal, but in some ways, I remember when I was a kid, we only ate what the garden gave or whatever. We didn't even have refrigeration at the time and so forth. And to America, it was TV dinner at the time, totally at the antipode of that type of things. And then through the year, it started changing split because people going to Europe after the war and so forth, young kids going back to Europe in vacation, they ended up being in Italy, in France, in England, and they learned about wine. There was nothing when I came to this country. And sometimes there is some very good wine now in different parts of the country. So they learn about this. So it's quite different than it used to be. But people are going back now to home cooking, not only home cooking after the pandemic, certainly, but also organic cooking and all that, having a garden, having that type of thing. I know my son-in-law is teaching sustainable food and so forth. There is many organizations around those type of things. There is a dichotomy here in the sense that you have people who never cook, never study, and other people who are really interested in cooking, in the production of food, in the distribution of food, and so forth. So it's quite different than it used to be. Actually, a restaurant too. I work in New York at the Pavilion. When I came here, it was considered really the greatest restaurant in America, French restaurant, that is. And it was very good, actually. But at that time, if you ask people, then any great restaurant was called a continental restaurant or French restaurant, often written in French, the menu, totally misspelled usually, but it was that type of thing. There was no great Italian restaurant, Chinese, Japanese, and so forth. There were some, of course, I used to go in Chinatown, in place too, but not considered four-star New York Times and so forth. And now it's quite different. Of course, there is a couple of French restaurants here and there, but mostly great restaurants. You have Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and so forth. And for me, after all the books that I've done, I am often, as you say, I seem to have an accent. So they say I'm considered maybe the quintessential French chef. And you take one of my books, and on page 22, you have a black bean soup with the banana and cilantro on top, because my wife, born in New York, but originally from Cuba and Puerto Rico. So you have those things, or you find a lobster roll from Connecticut, or a clam chowder, or stuff like that. So after all of those years, I consider myself probably the quintessential American chef. So.
I don't think anyone's going to argue with you on that. Talking of books, I understand that The Art of Jacques Pepin will be coming out hopefully this fall. What can we expect in that latest book?
Well, the best book that I may have done is called The Art of Cooking. I did in the 80s, again with my friend Tom. We did 34,000 pictures, and I kept 3,000 of them. And we did 2 volumes, 1,500 pictures each. It took 5 years. It was a long process. So it was The Art of Jacques Pepin. Then not too long ago, a few years ago, I wanted to show some of my panning of chicken, especially. And I asked my publisher, I'd say, yeah, absolutely. As soon as I send a couple of pictures of chicken, they say, can we have a recipe with that? So we did The Art of the Chicken. And at that point, the recipe verbalized and a story about my mother or wherever I worked, talking about chicken and so forth. So this, we're expanding to The Art of Jacques Pepin. So at that point, I'm going to have 100 recipe and 100 paintings. So that type of thing. So we'll see what happens.
And give us a sense of what food Jacques Pepin is enjoying at the moment, because like we said, trends come and go. Is there anything that you're particularly eating more of at the moment, or something that you're enjoying?
Certainly, but it probably has to do with my age and my metabolism change. And when you're a young chef, we tend to add to the plate and this and that decoration. And now I take away to be left with something a bit more essential without too much embellishment in the plate. So that trend has to do with my age and with the way you change. But otherwise, simplicity for me is still the best thing, and the quality of ingredient and so forth.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you for sparing us the time. We wish you and your foundation, of course, continued success. We look forward to seeing the new book coming out this fall. And as we said, we wish you a very happy 90th birthday, legend and iconic chef Jacques Pepin. Thanks for joining us.
And happy cooking to you.
And if you want to celebrate Jacques Pepin's 90th birthday and either attend one of the 90th birthday events around the nation or hold one of your own, then visit his website at CelebrateJacques, that's CelebrateJacques.org.
Some people won't give you the real talk on drugs, but it's time we know the facts. Fentanyl is killing people. It's a powerful opioid, often made illegally and commonly mixed with illicit drugs. It can even be pressed into counterfeit pills that resemble prescription medications. Just 2 milligrams, about the size of a few grains of sand, could potentially be lethal. This isn't an ad to scare you, but it is an ad to make you think twice. Get the facts. Go to realdealonfentanyl.com. This message is brought to you by the Ad Council.
Time now for a look at other stories making the headlines this week. The Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, CCM, who created the 119K Commission in the state to look at disconnected youth, have launched a new youth foundation. The organization was created to carry on the work of the commission after it released a report late last year with recommendations to the state on halving the number of disconnected young people in the next 10 years. Joe DeLong is the executive director and CEO of CCM and said they didn't want to lose the expertise they had as they move forward.
And that foundation is not governed just by mayors and first selectmen, but it brings together many of those same partners that worked through the process of the 119K Commission that ultimately led to the Young People First report. So the Foundation for Youth is comprised of leaders both in the business space as well as the labor space, leaders in education, leaders in Connecticut and school finance, as well as the nonprofit and social services sector.
DeLong says one of the main findings of the report was to increase educational spending in the state, and a recent survey carried out by the foundation among voters showed that 72% polled said educational funding should be prioritized in the state budget over other spending. DeLong said despite the state's fiscal guardrails that remain in place, he believes the foundation's survey and polling results show strong support for increased educational spending, and how that occurs will be down to the state legislator.
53.5% of those polled said that they would actually support state tax increases to fund education in Connecticut. I think that's a pretty good determination as to how much of a priority the funding of public education system is to our residents and taxpayers in the electorate within the state.
The Connecticut State Library Service has launched a new statewide initiative called Growing Equitable Library Services. The project awards libraries with a grant to help them train staff through a series of workshops to enable them to become strength-based, trauma-informed, anti-racist, social and emotionally conscious community institutions. Kim Poe is a children and young adult consultant with the State Library and one of the founders behind the initiative, and explains why they started it.
When we talk about public libraries in particular, we say, they're the community's living room. They're the great equalizer. That's what we say. And I think public libraries do a great job striving for those goals. Maybe more recently than previously, but we've always known that in order to do that, we need to understand the needs of different people. As our communities and our country grows and people have different life experiences and come and join us from other countries.
So far, 3 libraries have received grants of $3,500 and are based in East Haven, North Haven, and Stratford. Poe explained the criteria they use to select the library's projects.
We just kind of look at the amount of funding that we have to award and choose the programs that seem to be the most detailed, the most thought out, and the ones that have the most fruitful partnerships and goals that may have the highest impact in their community. But I'm hoping that we get the Northeast and Northwest corner, some of those more rural areas in future years.
The libraries will be providing a safe area for the LGBTQIA+ community, a self-care station for those experiencing homelessness, and programming and engagement for people with autism. The Connecticut Council for Small Towns, or COST, celebrated its 50th birthday recently at its annual town meeting. The organization was created to give the state's small towns with populations under 30,000 a voice at the capital. Connecticut has 169 towns and 138 of them have populations less than 30,000 residents. Betsy Gara is the executive director of COST and said small towns face many challenges and often don't have the funding themselves to solve all their issues, like the rising cost of special education.
And a lot of the small towns are very concerned that the cost of special education is increasing by 5% or more every year, and there just really isn't any way to resolve that. And so we're looking at opportunities to, first of all, reduce the number of out-of-state placements, which are driving up costs in Connecticut, and also looking at ways of sharing these services so that one town isn't bearing the burden of providing this special education in a way that could be accomplished more efficiently with neighboring communities.
Governor Lamont always attends the Cost Annual Conference and this year spoke on several topics, one of them being energy and why it's so expensive in the state and what might be possible to help bring the cost and generation of energy down.
We can't control pipelines coming into our state. They come from 4 other states. I can't control natural gas by ship because it's really expensive because of the Jones Act, so we have to buy it from Europe where it costs twice as much money. But one place where I think the Trump administration could be helpful for us is when it comes to nuclear power. And as you know, we've got Millstone, and Millstone generates almost all of our carbon-free power.
Another area of expense for small towns is the cost of healthcare for their municipal employees. Sean Scanlon, the state comptroller, explains some of the facts and figures behind healthcare costs that everyone is facing.
Healthcare has gotten more and more expensive for people. 41% increase in the average premiums of the people of Connecticut for employer-based healthcare plans. That is outrageous, and the costs are so expensive, not just for the people who are in these plans, but for the towns and for me as the state who oversees the largest employer-based plan in the state. 250,000 people get their insurance through my office, 60,000 of which are municipal employees on the partnership plan.
The cost event allows small-town mayors and first selectmen to network, but also to find out about the latest changes in law and regulations that affect them. And President Trump and his new administration are continuing to surprise the nation, recently issuing a memo stating there will be a freeze on all federal funding for multiple agencies, which would have impacted every state in the nation. It was met with immediate outcry and legal challenges by various states, including Connecticut. 48 hours later, though, and the Trump administration walked back the freeze memo, but it was unclear if they still intended to challenge a temporary block that was placed on the original memo by a federal judge in a court appearance to be held on Monday, February 3rd. That's all from us for this edition. Do send us your questions and story ideas to the show via our website at connecticut-east.com or Facebook or Twitter at Connecticut East and on Instagram at Connecticut East This Week. And you can listen to the show again on our social platforms, on demand, and by asking your smart speaker to play Connecticut East This Week podcast. And please like, follow, and share on your social media too. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thank you for listening.